Has Xi Jinping gone mad with power? His latest moves indicate he might try to become emperor. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. In the grim darkness of today, there is only war. Xi Jinping is on his way to becoming God Emperor of the Chinese Communist Party. Xi is incredibly ambitious. Since he came to power, 5 million of his political rivals have been investigated in what he calls an anti-corruption campaign. The anti-corruption campaign largely targeted officials in a clique tied to former Chinese leader, Xi's biggest political rival, and humanized frog Jiang Zemin. With his enemies weakened, Xi was able to remove term limits to his power, essentially becoming leader for life. But he still isn't satisfied. You know what all this means? It's time for another episode of the people's favorite communist soap opera, General Hostility. Previously on General Hostility. Jiang Zemin may be dead, but his legacy lives on. While in power, Jiang added his political ideology to the Communist Party's constitution. He called it the Three Represents. But Xi Jinping has his own competing ideology. Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. And he wants to use it to usher in a new era for the Communist Party and China itself. I'll tell you more after the break. Welcome back. Xi Jinping is planning to use a combination of Marxism and a twisted take on traditional Chinese culture to make himself into a god emperor. Remember, in ancient China, emperors were considered divine beings. Xi would like to get in on that. You know, I wouldn't mind him being a divine being if it meant he left this mortal realm permanently. Like anything in a communist country, the process begins with state-run media. The propaganda shapes public opinion. Then, the party rolls out specific agendas and policies. Here's the propaganda. CCP mouthpiece Xinhua just ran a series called Deeply Understanding the Great Significance of the Two Combinations. Yes, it's a nightmare having to read through communist lingo, but I suffer for you. The articles have names like Establishing and Developing Socialism with Chinese Characteristics is the Only Way, The Logical Necessity of Organic Combination, and Exploring Future-Oriented Theoretical and Institutional Innovation. Communists really like to use pseudo-intellectual language. It sounds a lot nicer than just saying, "We'll kill you and take your stuff." Basically, the two combinations mean smashing together Marxism with traditional Chinese culture. You know, the culture Mao tried to wipe out in the Cultural Revolution? Marxism and traditional Chinese culture go together like peanut butter and a kid with severe peanut allergies. Xi has been laying the groundwork for this from the beginning. Shortly after he came to power in 2013, he visited the Kong family mansion where the descendants of Confucius lived. He talked about how important it was for the past to serve the present. In 2021, he passed what the party calls a historical resolution. It was a huge deal and a sign of Xi's increasing power. It talked about how Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era represents the Marxism of contemporary China and of the 21st century, and embodies the best of the Chinese culture and ethos of our time. There are dozens of examples of talking about traditional Chinese culture in this way. And keep in mind, this is not being said about Jiang Zemin's ideology, the Three Represents. Only Xi Jinping thought has the backing of Marxism and 5,000 years of Chinese culture. It's a way for Xi to sideline Jiang in the grave. Man, Jiang must have a massive tombstone because even while dead, Xi is still apparently stuck in his shadow. Bear with me for a moment as I go through some more communist jargon. These new commentaries say to fully implement Xi Jinping thought and treat Marxism with a scientific attitude. And we must always firmly grasp the worldview and methodology of Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era to explore future-oriented theoretical and institutional innovation. I hate this stuff. But it's important because it gives us clues about what Xi's planning. According to China risk consultancy Sino Insider, the commentaries are paving the way for all the ideology of Xi's predecessors, especially Jiang, to be treated with a, quote, scientific attitude and make, quote, scientific improvements to them. In other words, eventually replace them entirely with Xi Jinping thought. Xi could be paving the way for an official denouncing of Jiang Zemin, something that has never happened before. Xi's got a massive ego. Guys that are full of themselves say they're a 10, Xi is like, I'm an 11. That's literally what my name means in Roman numerals. In particular, it would be interesting to see what such a scenario would mean for Jiang's primary legacy, the persecution of the Falun Gong spiritual practice. But Xi could have even bigger ambitions than that. He might try to establish himself as the de facto emperor of the Red Dynasty and establish a new autocracy with echoes of the Chinese imperial system, with Xi Jinping thought as the cornerstone of a new civilization. It's probably crazy though, right? Xi Jinping wouldn't do that, right? He doesn't have any imperial ambitions, right? This could actually be a way for Xi to survive the collapse of the Communist Party. China is facing unprecedented tribulations. The population is shrinking. Youth unemployment is at an all-time high. And protests are erupting that specifically call out the Chinese Communist Party. And like any good captain, Xi is intent on being the first on a lifeboat and watching the ship sink from a safe distance. Xi might try to pin all the troubles on the Communist Party, dissolve it and any restraints still left on him by the Marxist-Leninist system, and position himself as the overseer of a transition to a new era. Of course, the most likely thing is that Xi will end up alienating everyone in the party and everyone in China, and everyone will put the blame squarely on his head, which might not then remain attached to his shoulders. Yep, Warhammer was just describing communist China. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a fan who supports China Uncensored on our exclusive social media platform on Locals. If you'd like to join, head over to chinauncensored.locals.com. Today's question comes from For the Truth 12. Seems to me anything we buy from China is feeding their warmongering ambition. Can we not stop any products from China being sold in the USA markets? Can we even do that since both countries are so interdependent for goods in the selling market? Can we uncouple from China? That should prove interesting. Globalism is here to stay. Isolationism and one world CCP does not seem to me the way the globe will ferry. Just saying. That's a very important question. I think it would actually make for a great episode, but here's the short of it. Yes, the US can decouple from China, and it's essential that it does. The CCP considers itself at war with the US. The goal is the destruction of the US. That ultimately makes business kind of hard. That's like hearing someone wants to murder you, then visiting their sandwich shop and asking them to make you a Reuben. It is true the US is dependent on China for a lot of things. COVID revealed how dependent the US is on medical supplies made in China, which should make it very clear how important it is to decouple from China. But right now, China is way more reliant on the US, and that gives the US a lot of leverage. The Trump administration leveraged hundreds of billions of dollars worth of tariffs against the CCP for unfair trade practices. The Biden administration carried those on. The CCP responded with their own tariffs, but they were worth only a tiny fraction of the value. Especially devastating were the Biden administration's restrictions on microchips to China. So the US has tools. The problem is they keep trying to use pliers when they should be using a table saw. But also keep in mind, a lot of our dependence on China is because of insane subsidies. For example, it's cheaper to ship something from Shanghai to San Francisco than it is to ship something from Los Angeles to San Francisco. If we got rid of all the things that gave China an unfair advantage, it would really help US business in the US. And that doesn't mean becoming isolationist. There was plenty of global trade going on before China joined the World Trade Organization. Cutting authoritarian regimes out of the picture would only help in the long run. Thanks for your question and your support. Thank you for watching. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.